Good evening. Hi, I'm John Wilton-Davies. I'd like to tell you this evening, not actually so much about a trip to the South Pole, but how I got into an expedition like that in the first place, and give everyone a few tips about how they could do the same if that was your cup of tea. In spring 2006, I was a typical desk-based office worker, spent 25 years in the financial services industry. Had no real endurance, eventing expertise at all, no mind to do so, no outdoor experience, no survival skills, nothing like that. And then 6 months later, I was walking solo and unsupported across Antarctica. The first day that I ever spent sleeping on my own in a tent was actually my first day on the expedition in Antarctica, which I suppose you could say is like throwing yourself in the deep end. So, why? One has to say. People go on expeditions for a variety of reasons, and publicly people will come up with all sorts of grand sounding motives, such as I am wanting to draw attention to global warming. I want to show others what's possible. If a normal person can do this, then so can you. I'm going to carry out important scientific work in whichever environment I'm in. Or I'm going to raise enormous sums of money for charity. But at the end of the day, I think 95% of people that go on any sort of major trip are doing it because they think it's going to be bloody good fun. And the reasons that they may otherwise give you are largely dreamt up because they feel that's the sort of message that potential sponsors want to hear. But at the end of the day, people are only going to do this type of thing if it's going to be enjoyable for them. Why did I go? Well, a combination of reasons. I think like everybody, when you're young, you have dreams of what you'd like to do and what you're capable of. I always had this feeling that I could do something really fantastic physically. I could win the 1500 metres in the Olympics, or I could climb Mount Everest or something like that. And like everybody else, it dies away and you end up being the same as everybody else, forgetting your dreams. I got to the age, at this time I was 44, and having had a few years of employment behind me, I had a bit more money than perhaps I used to have previously. Quite importantly, again, mid-40s, I felt that if I was going to do anything big and serious, then I'd better get on with it whilst my body was still potentially capable of doing a major expedition. And I also had a young family. And a young family is perhaps not the best time to be thinking of going off on major expeditions. But certainly to someone like me, it made me think that the end is approaching. And if I'm going to go and do something, then now's the time to do it. Now, all of these reasons put together do actually have, surprisingly, a scientific term described to them, known as that. So, having decided I was having a midlife crisis, and I needed to go and do something to get over this, why did I choose to go and walk to the South Pole? Well, for the reasons I've mentioned before, and particularly having the young family, I was well aware that if I was going to go and do a major expedition, then it would not go down well at all at home if I came back, as I understand everybody does from their first expedition, and says, that was fantastic, I'm going to go and do another one. So in my planning, I needed to come up with something that was going to be so miserable that I would never want to do anything again. And it was going to be so tough that the physical challenge I was looking for would have been satisfied, and I would come home and put my pipe and slippers on and live happily ever after with my grandchildren on my knee. What's it actually like walking across Antarctica on your own? Well, firstly, it is awe-inspiring, as you might imagine. At times it is very scary. Of course, it's cold. It's life-changing. It's mentally very, very tough. But it's actually very, very boring most of the time. 8 hours of the day, 10 hours of the day if you're feeling active, then that is the view. When you see pictures of people walking across Antarctica, it looks flat. And sometimes it is fairly flat, but a lot of the time it's sufficiently rough that you have to be looking down at your feet to see where you're going. Otherwise, you fall over on your arse quite a lot. The other 14 hours of the day are the inside of a tent most of the time. So you don't go to Antarctica for the visual stimulus. You see a lot of interesting stuff in the camp before you start, and a little bit in the plane on the way over there. But when you're actually there, then an interesting bump in the snow is about as exciting as it gets sometimes. This is a description I've seen of a typical expedition, not just to Antarctica, but actually an expedition anywhere. When you're wandering around on your own, in a white environment where nothing much is going on from one day to the next, there are an awful lot of reasons why you don't want to get out of bed in the morning. Actually, being exhausted doesn't tend to be one of them. The most common one is that, because there's not an awful lot that you know you're going to be looking forward to in the day. The day is just going to be quite boring. The other reason it's very hard to get out of bed in the morning is that. Because if it's not going to be boring, it's probably going to be bloody scary. And one way or the other, you're not getting out of a nice warm sleeping bag, sitting down at a cafe and having a cup of coffee. So motivation when you're on your own, certainly I found was very, very hard. Now I know, and I'm sure you've all heard, that people go off on adventures and expeditions and they have a dreadful time. They get frostbite and chop their fingers off and everything. And they come back and they forget all the horrible stuff, and all they remember is the fantastic time they had. And remember, one of my motivations for going to the South Pole was that I wasn't allowed to go back again. I wasn't allowed to do anything extreme again. And so I was quite nervous of forgetting these horrible moments. And so every day I would write my diary, and I would write all the interesting things that had or hadn't happened in there. And over the top of it, I would write this. So, did I achieve my objectives in Antarctica? Well, firstly, no, I didn't reach the South Pole. Given my notable lack of experience before I left, I didn't actually have any idea whether me getting to the South Pole on my own was feasible or not. For all I knew, I could get 5 miles and that would be my lot. In the end, I ran out of time before the plane I had to be on wanted to take me home again, when I was 70 miles short of the South Pole. People asked me if that was a disappointment with hindsight, and the answer actually, to be honest, is no. I was so fed up with the whole experience when I was there that I was just desperate to get home and have a bit of human company. Did I achieve the extreme physical challenge I was looking for? Yeah, to a degree. It actually wasn't as tough as you might imagine it was going to be. The average day in Antarctica is actually bright and sunny. It's cold and it's windy at times, but it's not as tough as you might expect it to be. And the route from the coast to the pole that most people, including myself, take is fairly flat. Did I get the degree of miserableness out of it that I wanted to make sure I wasn't tempted to go back? Yes, I did. And that lasted for around about 4 months after I got back, before I started planning the next expedition. there is every reason, having tried this once, why you shouldn't bother, why you don't want to do it again. But the overwhelming thought that one has is that life is too short not to. The experiences you have, whilst interspersed with long bouts of boredom, are so fantastic. And the lifestyle of being on an expedition is just so amazing in comparison with life at home that one has to dream. So that was me, but if you fancy doing the same, how do you get started? Well, there's two broad ways of doing it. One is to pay someone to do everything for you. You can go on a trip or shell out large sums of money. But as we're all standing here in a tent in the middle of a windy field, I guess we probably don't generally fall into that category. So other than paying someone to get you somewhere, the first thing you need to do is you need to become an expert. And whilst it may sound rash and foolhardy of me to have dived into a solo trip to Antarctica on my own as my first expedition, I did feel I was pretty competent before I got there. I had spent 18 months or so becoming an expert in what I was about to do. Not so much in actually experiencing the environment. I had attempted to get some cold weather training by a trip to Svalbard up in northern Norway, in the middle of a heat wave they were having, and managed to get the temperatures down to -3, which wasn't really too much of experience. And then spent 3 weeks walking across the ice cap in Greenland a few weeks later, where the average temperature seemed to be about 25 centigrade. Came back with a lovely suntan, but not much idea of what Antarctica was going to be like. But I had read, I had talked to people, I had met people, I had listened to people, I had practiced and I had trained as hard as I felt I could. And when I set out, I felt I had a good chance of achieving what I was aiming to do. The second part, of course, is the harder bit, raising the money. Raising money for expeditions varies in difficulty, of course, depending on how much you're trying to raise. Going to the South Pole, as far as I know, is probably by far the most expensive way to spend money on an expedition. And all in all, I would say that my experiences cost me getting on for £100,000. So it's not a cheap hobby by any means. I was lucky to very quickly find a sponsor for the whole trip, and then experienced a very common feeling amongst explorers when the sponsor pulled out on me about 2 weeks before I went. And so the flat that I'd owned in Exeter for many years suddenly funded the expedition, much to the delight of my family, of course. I won't today go into how to raise sponsorship, other than to say that what you read generally doesn't work. What you think will work generally doesn't work. And finding money is largely a matter of who you know or some very good luck. One thing I have learnt, though, is there is no point chasing sponsors for the sake of chasing a sponsor. People will phone up their local sports equipment company or a tent manufacturer or training shoe firm and try and get free kit. My experience is that if you're trying to get gear, then anything under about £300, it's actually far more cost effective to buy it than it is to try and get it for nothing, because of the time you've then got to put in to developing a relationship with that company. Obviously that figure is going to vary depending on whether you earn £10 an hour at work or whether you earn £1,000 an hour. But spending your time wisely and cost effectively becomes very important to you when you're trying to put together an expedition and work at the same time. Depending on your family situation, and bearing in mind I'm older and married with children, perhaps the hardest thing in getting everything sorted out is the final point, which, sorry, it's a bit low down, getting permission. If you have to get permission from your parents, then that's fine, because all your parents do is worry about it and tell you what an idiot you are. If you have to get permission from wife and children, then it becomes a lot harder. I'll come back to the aspect of permission in just a moment, but the hardest aspects of putting an expedition together: money and family. What qualities do you need to get past these barriers? Well, we all know the sort of qualities you need to go on an expedition, but the qualities you need to actually get permission from your family is one only, and you have to be selfish. Expedition life is incredibly selfish. You will spend a lot of time away from your family on the expedition. You will spend a lot more of it away from your family in training and looking for sponsors. But the key to the whole question is picking your moment. Asking your wife for permission to take effectively a year off family life and spend the family savings is definitely an art. But I came up with the fantastic solution to this problem. When I have to say, this is not me asking my wife this question. This is my wife asking me. And when she asks that question, you think, yes. Not to the question. You think no to the answer to the question, but then you think it's going to happen anyway. And you have a momentary period, which probably lasts no longer than a few hours, when your wife feels she will say yes to anything that you ask her. And I was very lucky that when I was trying to work out how to ask my wife if I could go to the South Pole, that I sat her down and she said, "Before you ask me what you want to ask me, there's something I want to ask you." And luckily I said, "You go first." Okay, so you've decided what you want to do. You've got permission, if you're lucky. You've got an awful lot of planning to actually turn your plans into reality. And the best bit of advice I can give you is get help. Any expedition is a hell of a job in the organisational side, in getting the money, getting the time off work, putting everything together. The more glamorous the expedition you're planning, the more help you'll be offered. Not necessarily from sponsors, but from friends, from family, from people that think they would like to be associated with this great venture you're doing. Help is invaluable. People get very excited when you talk about things like South Pole expeditions or North Pole expeditions, and they all want to be a part of it. But bear in mind that people's attention span is finite, and if you're planning an expedition 3 years hence and someone offers you their help for nothing, then they're not going to be giving you a large part of their time for the next 3 years. They will get bored and wander off and go and do something else. So if you really need people's help and you're relying upon it, then be prepared to pay them. People will help you for nothing, but if they let you down, you can't do anything about it. But if you're paying them for a job, you tend to get delivery much better. And in my previous expeditions, I've managed to have a fantastic balance of paying for professional help where I need it, and getting people to help me for nothing. But you really will need help if you're going to put something significant together. So back to me very briefly. My first expedition was solo to the South Pole. I have been planning, because I enjoyed it so much, to go back. I've been planning that for the last 2.5 years now. I've not been back purely because I haven't been able to find the sponsorship. My plan has been to walk to the pole and back again this time, thinking it might save on flight fees. But apparently it doesn't. Because that's not happened, I do have a trip planned for September where thankfully we do have sponsorship, which I think is going to be an awful lot more fun than going to the South Pole. That is supposed to be a map of 27 EU countries, and me and 2 friends are planning on driving and a bit of flying in between each of those, and running a marathon in each of them one day at a time, so 27 days and 27 marathons. I think that'll be great fun, and whilst it will be miserable in the same way the South Pole was, I will have company, there'll be other people to talk to, and it will just be so much better. The concept of running marathons for 27 days in a row when I hate running doesn't bother me as much as the expectation that it's all going to go horribly wrong after the second day when the bus breaks down, for example. But having started my adventure life thinking big, it's very hard to then come back down and think, oh, I'll go and run to work tomorrow. And that'll be exciting. What I have found, though, is that if you set yourself an enormously tough target for an adventure or an expedition, then the training that you need to do for it, or that you think you need to do for it, the physical training this is, becomes so much easier. And if you set yourself a target, for example, of running 27 marathons in a row, then running one marathon mentally becomes so much easier. If you set yourself a target of running one marathon, then running one becomes tough. Having a really hard target brings your fitness and your stamina on so much faster, and it's absolutely fantastic. Anyway, that's my story. I've promised to keep it brief. So any questions?